Hello everybody, and in today's video we will be taking a very early look at the winter 2020-2021. This is not a forecast or outlook, but rather we are simply just taking a look at the basics for the upcoming winter. You won't be seeing any sort of temperature or snowfall forecasts, however you may see some analogs from the past and know the difference between a strong or weak La Nina, or maybe even a neutral phase. If you are interested in this type of content and these type of videos heading into this upcoming winter, we will have many more, so now is the time to subscribe to our channel, US Weather Action, if you are interested in seeing those videos in the coming months. So, without further ado, let's begin. Once again, a weak La Nina is currently expected. Here, let's take a look at the model predictions for the ENSO. This is as of June 2020, but this is the one model that typically doesn't change too much. However, there is still quite the spread, as you can see. Basically, though, we're looking at a consensus of somewhere near a cold neutral phase or a weak La Nina. So right now, we're going to say a weak La Nina looks pretty possible at this point. The differences won't be that drastic, you know, whether it's negative 0.4 Celsius or negative 0.6 Celsius in the ENSO basin. So anyways, we're looking at a weak La Nina most likely for this upcoming winter. Last winter we had more of a neutral phase, and that let the other teleconnections kind of dominate, even though they'll continue to play a role, you know, on our pattern greatly. But now we do have something to go off of, and that is the weak La Nina. So first, I'm sure you've seen this map 1,000 times possibly. If you haven't, this is the typical La Nina pattern in the United States and in North America in general. So we have a blocking high pressure in the northern Pacific that creates a ridge on the west coast with a little bit of troughing in the northern plains and perhaps the Great Lakes. At the same time, it is often that we see a southeast ridge set up from the southern plains into the southeast and even the mid-Atlantic. Also, we see some dry conditions across the southern U.S. and potentially some wet conditions with above average precipitation in the Midwest and Tennessee Valley. Also, wet conditions are possible on the northwestern U.S. coast. So that's what we typically see in a weak La Nina phase. Now let's get into La Nina temperature anomalies and what we typically see with temperatures here in the United States, you know, relative to normal with a La Nina. So composite is just what we typically see with all these years of La Nina phases. Trend is just exactly what it sounds like, the trend, and then composite plus trend. This is the ideal map for you to look at. So, and then this is the frequency, but I would keep your eyes on the left side of this. So, composite, you can see typically with La Nina, we have below average temperatures in the northern plains and above average temperatures in the southern plains as well as the southeast and the mid-Atlantic. However, the trend across the past 70 years and perhaps beyond that has been for things to be a little bit more above average than the composite, and that is the West Coast has been more so slightly above average in the temperature department, as well as much of the southern U.S. and even the eastern seaboard, ranging all the way from the southeast coast to the mid-Atlantic and New England, where you see that second shade of orange in northern New England. So the composite plus trend, that is what we are looking at. So first, as you can see, La Nina temperature anomalies, we typically, just in general, have above average temperatures in the southern U.S. and below average temperatures in the north central U.S. Also above average temperatures possible on the east coast. Now it's important to look at the past 10 winter temperature anomalies. Keep in mind, meteorology and weather in general just continues to change fast. And this is something that we've seen millions and millions of years, across millions and millions of years. Weather changes, the climate changes. For whatever reason you believe, you know, I'm not going to say it's, you know, that's not what we're here for. But anyways, past winter temperature anomalies here, for, of course, the past 10 years, this is looking at temperatures above average or below average. You can see the past 10 winters have been pretty warm relative to normal, with the west, the southern U.S., and the eastern U.S. all being pretty above average, about 1 to 2 degrees above average. And in the grand scheme of things, that is generally pretty above average. And the only area that hasn't been above average is the northern plains, where they've actually seen slightly below average temperatures in the past 10 years. And the Pacific Northwest has been relatively normal, regarding temperature anomalies. So now let's look at past 10 winter precip anomalies. As you can see, we've seen above average precipitation being common in the southeast coast, as well as the Tennessee Valley, Ohio Valley, western Pennsylvania, western New York, and just the Great Lakes in general, with below average precipitation in Florida, as well as parts of the far eastern seaboard from eastern Virginia and up into southern New England, and then below average precipitation as well in the southwestern U.S., and then just a small area of above average precipitation actually in the northwestern U.S., specifically near Seattle and western Washington. So that's what we've seen as far as the past 10 winters precipitation and temperature anomalies. It's important to look at both of these because these definitely factor into the winter outlook as well. You can't just ignore what's happening recently when making your winter outlook. Now, once again, this isn't an outlook. We'll probably have an outlook in several months from now. But this video was made in July. It is far, far too early to make a forecast or outlook. But, watching stuff like this and, doing your own research about what typically, what La Nina winters typically produce is definitely a good thing to do, at least at this point. So now let's look at La Nina snowfall anomalies. These graphics, by the way, are courtesy of the National Weather Service. So anomalies, you can see, typically we have well above average snowfall in the northwestern U.S., and also above average snowfall in parts of northern New England as well as upstate New York, and then below average snowfall in much of the central plains and upper mid-Atlantic from DC to southern Pennsylvania, New York City. So, but not all La Niñas are the same. It's important to note that. Not all El Niños are the same, not all neutral phases are the same, not all La Niñas are the same. So now, of course, you have the teleconnections. Those are always going to be very important, the other teleconnections. But let's look at snowfall during weak La Nina years, because there is a difference between weak and strong La Nina years. So first, weak La Nina years, you can see snowfall in general, as far as the difference from average snowfall, you can see slightly above average snowfall has been typical across much of the northern U.S. from really the northwestern U.S., the Rockies, and heading into the north central plains, as well as northern New England. Near average snowfall across much of I-95, with the exception of southern New England, but even that is generally around average, and then below average snowfall in parts of the central and southern plains, as well as perhaps parts of the Ohio Valley. Now let's look at snowfall during strong La Nina years. Once again, we don't expect a strong La Nina at this point. It's, of course, still on the table, but right now we don't see it happening. Snowfall during strong La Nina years, we have below average snowfall across much of I-95 from Virginia to Pennsylvania, New Jersey. Of course, Maryland's in there. Up into New York State, well, especially southeastern New York State and southern New England. And then above average snowfall in the northwestern United States once again. So that becomes a common theme. You have above average snowfall just typically during a La Nina in the northwestern U.S. with below average snowfall perhaps in the southern plains and parts of the East Coast. Now, once again, it's important to note that we expect a weak La Nina, if not a cold neutral phase. But right now, I'd say a very weak La Nina looks most likely. So, without further ado, let's look at La Nina temperatures, just to make things a little bit more clear in case those previous maps were a little bit hard to read. This is not an outlook, once again, not a forecast for this upcoming winter. This is just typically what we would see in a La Nina year, with also those 10-year trends factored in somewhat. If we were to see a negative AO, negative NAO, and just positive not positive teleconnections, but just favorable teleconnections in general for colder weather on the East Coast. And of course, this would be different. It has so much to do with the NAO, the AO, the MJO, the PNA, just all those teleconnections, which we will, cover in just a second. But First, let's start with La Niña temperatures. You can see below average temperatures across the northern plains, but that's really it. Above average temperatures and even well above average temperatures from the southwest heading into the south central plains and also the Gulf Coast heading into the southeast and parts of the coastal mid-Atlantic. And then we have just above average temperatures from parts of the northwest heading into the central plains in areas like Oklahoma City. Also the Ohio Valley is in that above average temperature area, heading into all of the northeast in above average temperatures. Once again, as I just discussed earlier in the video, it is usual that you see a southeast ridge setup, especially during a La Niña winter. So that's basically where you see warm and even dry conditions across much of the southeast, and parts of the mid-Atlantic are also frequently impacted, as it also impacts the storm tracks. So that'll impact things like snowfall, because the low pressure will often be west of I-95, just in general on the East Coast. So that's where we're looking at as far as La Niña temperatures, as well as those 10-year anomalies factored in just a little bit. Now let's look at La Niña snowfall. Just a general theme of above average snowfall, just maybe slightly above average snowfall across much of the northern United States, with an area of average snowfall in between, and then an area of below average snowfall across much of the central and southern areas that do receive snowfall. Of course, we're not going to put it in, southern Georgia or northern Florida, just because they may be average, maybe a quarter inch of snowfall a year. So this is what we're looking at for La Niña snowfall. That may extend into parts of the upper mid-Atlantic, but this is just a general theme. Now, of course, this is a little bit impacted by just if we were to see a moderate or strong La Niña. But once again, that's not what we expect. However, it would not surprise me at all if we were to see a potent and just persistent, more so, southeast ridge setup. And that would really just kind of lower snowfall in really much of the eastern U.S. and especially just on the East Coast. And this is how that would happen. So, of course, we have the low pressure developing in the southern plains. This is just all hypothetical. This is just, but this is sometimes what we see. So, of course, you have the low pressure in the south, in the central plains. That works its way east-northeast, as they almost always do. East-northeast, and then it hits an area, pretty much just of high pressure somewhere in the upper mid-Atlantic. It's often around West Virginia or Pennsylvania. Sometimes it's in Ohio, sometimes it's in Virginia. It'll then transfer to the coast, and then a secondary low pressure will develop off the New Jersey or Long Island or even New England coast, and then move northeast. So that's how we see these areas of snowfall anomalies set up. Just because if this is where the jet stream is as well, it's going to follow that. And that's how we get below average snowfall in the upper mid-Atlantic, and then an area of about average snowfall between I-80 and I-90, and then perhaps above, or average snowfall between those. Hopefully I said that. And then above average snowfall north of I-90 especially, just because those areas are typically far enough north for that low pressure, even after it transfers to the coast. So, and it transfers to the coast once again because there's high pressure in eastern Canada, but at the same time, it'll probably have to work its way above that southeast ridge that could be present for a good portion of the winter, just because it's what we normally see in a La Niña. I'm not going to sit here and say that the eastern U.S. is going to see all this above average snowfall, just because it's important to look at what we typically see rather than what we typically want. And so, anyways, this is now what we can't predict. And no matter how much some people want to think that they can predict these kind of things right now, it is not possible. You cannot predict the NAO beyond a few weeks, nor can you predict the AO, the Arctic Oscillation, beyond a few weeks. Then we have the PNA, the EPO, and the MJO. Last year, we were really hit hard by that. PNA always seemed to be negative. And that's why we saw that ridging on the East Coast for a good portion of the year, even though most of the U.S. had above average temperatures. But that's why the only areas that had around average snowfall were places like northern New York State and northern New England. So once again, though, if this is just what we cannot predict more than a few weeks out. So I'm not going to, even when it gets time to maybe put out an outlook in October or early November, I'm not going to say that we're going to see a, negative NAO or negative AO or positive PNA or all these favorable teleconnections just because it hasn't worked out in past years. It's just not how it is, because you cannot predict these teleconnections beyond a few weeks. Anyways, everybody, I hope all this information helps, and this is just what we are looking at for this upcoming winter. Once again, not a forecast, not an outlook, but this is what a weak La Nina typically brings to the United States. If you like this information, be sure to subscribe to the channel for more videos in the future, as eventually we'll have a winter outlook. But for now, this has been Josh Adams. Everybody, thanks for watching, and stay tuned as we head into the coming